audience participation, some questions. So we're going to have, and you can give us some feedback. This session is going to be the Health and Human Services Roundtable, which will start at 3:30. But again, we will have some questions for the audience at 3:20. So I hope you'll join again back there. Thanks so much. And if you're just joining, this is a webinar on blockchain and healthcare sponsored by the Office of the National Coordinator for Health IT and co-presented with the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation. We're going to start our panel for Health and Human Services, or the roundtable rather, at 3:30. And right now we're going to put up some questions for the audience. So we'd love to get some feedback from all of you. We do have the first poll question up, which is, personal health information may be placed on a blockchain if it is encrypted, true or false? So please put a choice. Results are already up there. Looks mostly false, but quite a few answered true. So maybe later in this round table. Question is up. What entity controls the data on a blockchain, true or false? I would say overwhelmingly, most people answered true to that question. Poll question coming up. Okay, then is participants in a blockchain have a common need to share, but do not need to explicitly trust each other. True or false? Like 96 people answered true and 30 people answered false on that one. And there's one local question before we go into our roundtable. This is a question to the data. Under data should be health data should be under the primary control of A, physicians and providers, B, hospitals and health delivery systems, C, insurance companies and payers, D, government and public health agencies, E, patients and individuals. Response that most people overwhelmingly thought patients and individuals should be the owners of their health data. All right, with that, we are going to go into our final session of the day. We'll be a roundtable discussion with officials from offices within the Department of Health and Human Services, and we're going to hear their thoughts on blockchain and healthcare and some of the work they're doing. I hand it over now to Debbie Bucci, who's an IT architect in the Office of Standards and Technology at ONC, who will be moderating the discussion. Debbie?
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you to so many participants that have hung around to the end, and hopefully it's the last but not least session. So we originally had 4 members, but because of the flu, we have 2 great presenters for us that they will first have some time to talk. And the questions, I think, will make this more interactive. And please, if you have any questions, put them into the Q&A window, and we'll queue them up for them to answer. Sean and Jose, are you both online?
Yeah, Jose.
Okay. We will start with you first. Jose, is that okay?
So, well, first of all, guys, it's great to get to know you, I guess, virtually. I am not a health expert, but I have actually done a blockchain implementation. We pilot it, functionally works, and what I'm going to do is kind of walk you through kind of we did that, and then I'm going to apply it in a very general way to healthcare. And I don't know everything about healthcare, but I just want to paint a picture for everyone on the phone so that you guys can maybe develop an understanding of what I mean. So, what blockchain is, I specifically said that I wanted to automate a business process and I wanted to operate at the data layer. And what I was able to do is actually firewall off a business process that I was responsible for, to design an optimal path around how that business process would execute most efficiently, but wasn't currently executing efficiently. And the process that I'm talking about was operating on 22 different IT systems that actually information went into or came out of at any point in time. It interfaced with 5,500 suppliers. They were companies that we did business with. We actually did financial analysis off those companies. We negotiated with those companies. We awarded rates to those companies. We awarded pricing to those companies, and then we facilitated business activities to those companies. So when you think about implementing blockchain, you think about a network of nodes that all share the same data, but that's really not the way you want to go about implementing it. The way you want to go about implementing it is taking one business process that you control end to end, figuring out what the optimal path of that business process is and what data you need to actually travel along that optimal path. And I want to start by building two nodes that allow for interactions, in my case, a government agency and industry and a group of industry partners that allow for interactions between the two. And what I learned is if you build it in that way, one, you can kind of control your risk as you build it. Two, you can automate business processes on top of your blockchain, right? You want to have a mechanism for automating business processes on top of your blockchain, and then extend your business network in a risk control way, and you can have the biggest impact. So I'll take you a little bit through this, and then I'm going to talk to a couple slides, and then I'll be done, and I'll open it up for questions. But basically what we did, it took 13 weeks from identifying the funds to actually fully building out a functional pilot. 13 weeks in the federal government, okay? We spent a very modest sum of money. If I told you, you wouldn't believe me, so I won't even say it, but we spent a very modest sum of money. And when we ran the competition, we actually competed it where the industry partner competed on a two-page set of parameters. We had requirements. I wasn't requiring that you take and develop oracles. I wasn't even requiring that you use blockchain. All I was saying to industry is, this is my business process. I collect this information from you. I do financial analysis. I develop negotiation objectives with the companies that we do business with, award contracts. I want you to take that business process, which you've all gone through, and I want you to automate it, and I want you to use a combination of the following technologies: automation, learning, artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, and blockchain. The value in blockchain for me was that I could redesign my business process on Hyperledger and have an immutable record of any interactions that I had between myself and another entity on that Hyperledger platform. And because I had an immutable record of data that was submitted to me by an industry partner that I wanted to interface with, I could actually take steps like financial analysis and I could automate them, leveraging automated machine learning, leveraging robotic processing automation. I minimized the risk by focusing in on a specific space. So what was the outcome of it, guys? Well, we removed the need for 22 different IT systems. If we went to full production, we would no longer have the need for 22 different IT systems. We created one simple interface to collect all of the information from our business partner that we were engaging with. And we took our business process time down from 110 days to less than 10 days. You guys go to the first slide. I'll give you a visual of this that I hope somewhat relates to the healthcare space. So operating at the data layer, guys, you were able to actually take a business process, like I said, that existed on 22 different business systems, and you're actually able to roll it into cloud environment. So as we use Hyperledger Fabric, as we Hyperledger Fabric in AWS, we actually used Amazon Web Services, we were able to fundamentally roll our business process off our existing aging IT systems and modernize them on a cloud-based delivery platform. We were able to center all activity a patient. And this is not something that I'm recommending you at HHS. This is not a business opportunity, guys. I'm just using this slide to kind of paint a picture for all of you, to make it a reality for all of you. But you can actually take and center all your data. If you're operating at the data layer, you can center all activity around your patient. So when a patient comes in, they actually come in with all their medical information, and then you can leverage microservices off your data layer, which is what I did when I did my blockchain. And you can leverage microservices to engage clinical trials and source information as it relates to that patient, because you're reading at the data layer. You're using microservice directly off of Hyperledger. Maybe you're leveraging automated machine learning. Maybe you're leveraging robotic processing automation. Maybe you're leveraging artificial intelligence. But you're interfacing with, you're taking data and clinical trial data and you're doing an analysis. Maybe you're taking patient information and what's afflicting them, and you're bouncing it off of a network of doctors who can, actually have expertise in this specific space and are located in a manner that this patient could readily access. Operating at the data layer gets you out of the business of building these ginormous bolt-on systems that you have to click through and use drop-down menus, and it gives you into the business of building microservices, constructing microservices for multiple parties that need to access that data and need to run some form of analysis on it. And the great thing about microservices is when you take down a microservice, it doesn't crash your entire system. Your system can still function, right? You have a system that is redundant and is built on a distributed network of data. That distributed network of data is reinforced the more the business network grows, right? So it's a fundamental shift in how you actually do business. But one of the things that I'm trying to point out to you is that redesign the entire functioning, the entire way that drug traceability is done in a private sector company would be a very difficult task. But picking one business process at a hospital and saying, if we buy prescription drugs, you must actually input that information, the drug manufacturer, onto our blockchain, say it's Hyperledger Fabric, and every single distributor or reseller that you do business with must have a node on that blockchain. Well, created complete traceability between me and the manufacturer as a hospital that's actually purchasing that drug, and I can extend that business network to activities that may need to capture in the business network. It's scalable. It's a risk-controlled way to scale. So next slide. And I don't want to spend too much time because I know there's probably a ton of questions. So some things that I learned from when I did my blockchain, the three key things that came out of it. One, look, when you're operating on the data layer, if you're talking about Bitcoin, it's all about trust, right? I'm not talking about Bitcoin. I'm talking about leveraging blockchain. I'm talking about automating a business process that is an application that I am interested in. Reduces level of effort. You can better focus time of your workforce. Instead of my workforce doing full financial analysis over a 30-day period, I was able to lower that time to a matter of seconds, 1 or 2 seconds, and they could focus on other things. So you're actually optimizing your system. And the other thing that you're doing in order to ensure that the blockchain operates flexibly, all of the data that I was taking in on Hyperledger, guys, anything that I needed for automation, I was running automation directly off Hyperledger via microservices. Anything that I didn't need to automate on top of, I was actually dropping off chain into MongoDB, and it mirrored the chain itself, but it kept my blockchain layer extremely flexible and allowed it to move super fast. And it kept all the heavy data, videos, anything that's like a picture, off in MongoDB, off chain, so that I had full flexibility and I could scale. So I could run automation that I needed. The thing is, I let them make it super interoperable. We have connectivity across multiple platforms. If you are going to do this in the health space, not everybody that you interact with is going to move off their platforms. So I built my blockchain layer, even though I didn't need those existing 22 systems in full-blown production. I could do API interface with those systems to actually share data with them so that fully interoperable with the existing data set. But the other thing I'll talk about, I always say in terms of interoperability, you got to redesign the web interface. You redesign the web interface, or nobody is actually going to understand what you're doing. You know, the technology folks that develop this can get all excited about how to create an Oracle, and I'm not talking about the company. They can get excited about doing that, but you actually have to sell it to an executive. You actually have to sell it to a manager. You're actually going to have to sell it to an operations person that's not going to understand hashing, that's not understand the cryptography. And so designing the user interface and showing them like, hey, you used to have to log into 20 systems and now you just put it in once. And actually showing them the automation in motion live and then tell them you no longer have to click through the system. That's the way I actually sell it to them. The last piece is you got to make it flexible. Microservices gives you flexibility to do controlled measured implementation. I talked about 2 nodes. I talked about taking and creating a relationship between 2 nodes and creating interoperability between those 2 nodes, being able to suck up data from disparate systems. And I talked about the flexibility of building microservices directly off the data layer, actually execute that business process. That sounds small, but functionally, once I prove that that business process works, now I can extend at my data layer and say, oh, well, now we only have the financial analysis person, the company that we're doing business with, the government professional that's evaluating the company. They're the only 3 nodes that have access. Maybe provide another access level for companies that want to order off my platform, right? In the care space, you may start with just, say, a patient data and access to doctors. Maybe at some point, you want to add the ability via microservice to have access to clinical trial data. I don't know, but it gives you a controlled way for implementation. So it's a scalable solution if you do it right. If you're dropping things off chain into Mongo, it becomes extremely scalable. If you don't drop things off chain into something like Mongo, you're going to have trouble with all of the platforms that exist, whether they're public or private, and we use private. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I said this a bunch of times throughout. I'll just kind of hit home on them again, and I hope this is valuable for all of you. When you're scaling a blockchain throughout an enterprise, focus on the use case and the business process. You're reimagining your business process. You're no longer confined to the business process that requires you to interface with multiple systems. You actually reimagine that business process because you can suck data off of any of the existing databases that you have. You can create a new user interface really inexpensively to collect all of that data at the point of attack. So don't redesign on the basis of the process that exists. Why not an optimal process that you wish you could operate at and have that actual capability? Blockchain is a foundational layer. You know, people talk about blockchain as it's going to transform the world. I fully believe that. Anybody that knows me will tell you that. But blockchain is going to change the world because it's in my belief, because it is a foundational layer that allows you to leverage tools in the form of microservices, automated machine learning, artificial intelligence, and autonomous systems. Take the third party out of the remittance process. That's a huge value add. I mean, that cuts 30% of bank transfer costs, right? If you're able to take the third party out. I believe it will allow you to do that. To have full visibility in your supply chain. And actually have full visibility into all your interactions within your supply chain. So imagine if you were managing a large supply chain and you built an PI with a DLT wrap. On one end, you have a group of folks that are actually buying products. Who knows what they're buying, right? Let's just say office supplies. And on the other end, you have a group of folks selling those products. With the DLT view, it gives you full visibility into all of the sales prices from the group of sellers. It gives you a record of everything that was purchased from those individuals, right? The guy sets the business rules of what data you want to receive from them and how often they're actually doing business with you. And it forces them to integrate based on your business rules. And backside, the ordering activities, now you have full visibility into the dollars they're spending, how often they're ordering, and what exactly they're ordering. So you control the rules and have full visibility, leveraging blockchain, leveraging DLT technology. That enhances user experience. You're no longer building walled bureaucratic processes to make sure that people follow through the maze to control your risk. You're controlling your risk on business rules and the ability to govern because you have full visibility into your network, right? leveraging microservices allows you to have scalability. You have controlled scalability. I've walked through like 4 different examples. I hope it isn't too confusing, but I was just trying to give you the flavor. And I've never done a webinar before like this. Right? With Agile and DevOps, guys, you have to keep it simple, keep it open. And like 5 or 6 times throughout this presentation, but got to leverage automation, got to leverage artificial intelligence, got to leverage machine learning. We did this. We did it in 13 weeks. We spent less than $200,000 to fully implement it. 30 weeks in a government setting, from identification of funds into full-blown pilot where we could actually demonstrate capability. We did it with a small business. The small business's name was United Solutions. They partnered with a company called Sapient, and we redesigned all the user interfaces in a 13-week period. So we targeted business process, controlled the scaling it out in a controlled manner, a business process that we fully controlled and we could reimagine, and which microservices so that we could be super flexible in how we scaled it out. So I really appreciate the time. I hope that wasn't all over the place and added a little bit of value. And I guess when it's time for questions, I'm happy to answer any should they come up.
Formally introduce you. I apologize. You were so ready to go. So it's just Jose Arita. I hope it's the Associate Deputy Assistant Secretary for Acquisitions, Assistant Secretary for Financial Resources, ASFR, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And Sean, have you been unmuted so we can hear you? We're now going to go to Chosen, Acting Associate Director, Oncology, Regulatory Science, and Informatics, Oncology Center of Excellence at FDA. Thanks so much. Your turn.
And sorry, nobody could hear me last time. Seems like I was on mute. And it's great to be here. So, Jennifer, I'd like to control my slides. Are you giving over control to me?
So just go ahead and see if you can advance your slides.
Okay. Let's work with me.
It is, but there you go.
There we go. Okay. Animation that is not coming up correctly. Is it possible to give me control so I could run the PowerPoint on my laptop?
Yeah. So I got an email and said that if you want to use the animation, you'd have to open the file up on your computer. What you can do is go up to screen and say share my screen and open the slides from there. Unfortunately, WebEx doesn't support animation in slides.
Okay. Well, I can do it without that in the interest of time, and I can just advance the slides, and we don't need to take advantage of the animation, but I can just describe what the intent of the animations were. So I'm going to speak about blockchain as a decentralized framework for data sharing, and I'm going to preface this. In fact, most of my talk is about why data sharing is critical to the FDA. And as you know, the FDA regulates about a quarter of the economy. The way we do that is through analyzing data and reflecting that in either the policy decisions that are constructed and communicated by the agency, or through the regulatory approval pathway. So on this slide, if we look at the data universe that the FDA presides over, and this slide is highlighting one component of that data universe, which is a major part of what we do, regulation of drugs and biologics. So look at the data universe. It has been an expansion of the big data universe in drug development. And as many of you know, big data has 4 different axes. It's not just about the size of data. For example, if you have a data repository with terabytes of data, that is not necessarily a big data repository. It's just a repository that happens to be 10 terabytes. There are three other axes that, from a computational perspective, define what big data is. And as we all know, big data has been expanding along all four axes. And let's look at where we are today. And this is a generalization when it comes to making regulatory decisions in drug development, in approved drugs and biologics, but also how the drug development community as a whole is generating and analyzing biomedical data. So if we look at the variety of data that the FDA is currently reviewing and receiving, and that's on the variety axis on the slide. For the most part, we're looking at clinical trial data that, in terms of the veracity of the data, meaning uncertainties about data quality and structure, these are mostly structured data sets, data coming from clinical trials to us. And in terms of volume, these data sets are no more than a few gigabytes. Even the largest randomized clinical trial, when the data is submitted to the FDA, is typically a few gigabytes in size. In terms of data velocity, which is a computational concept that speaks to the frequency at which the data is analyzed and generated, we're getting the data intermittently. Essentially, when a company, a sponsor of a clinical study, registrational study in support of a marketing application, a drug or a biologic or a device, they send us a new drug application and a new biologic licensing application, and along with that comes the data that we analyze to make our regulatory decisions. So in terms of data velocity, it's intermittent. How we look at the of this expanding universe of big data, these are the opportunities that we would like to leverage. And so what does that mean? We would like to go beyond just clinical trial, additional clinical trial data for making our regulatory decisions. You may have heard a lot about electronic health record data or real-world data that is playing a greater role in informing regulatory decisions, and we're working on frameworks that can help us better leverage electronic health record data. However, beyond EHR data, there are multiple other opportunities that we'd like to leverage, including sensors and wearables to capture patients' experience, and also data from the Internet of Things to capture environmental exposure data, for example, factors that may influence the patient's experience. Take a drug or a product that we're responsible for regulating. And also the multi-omic milieu, which includes genomic data, but also data from proteomic pipelines and the microbiome. Those are the different variety of data sets that we would like to leverage in making our regulatory decisions. When we do that, the veracity of the data, and at that edge, as we call it, of the expanding universe of big data, the veracity is undefined, and the volume, petabytes and zettabytes and more. If we do this right, we can have a real-time understanding of patients' experience, the individual's experience, taking drugs or using devices that we're responsible for regulating. In terms of data velocity, this holistic edge of the expanding universe of big data would allow us to have a more real-time understanding of the patient's experience. So real sharing and blockchain is an effort to go from a reductionist approach, an intermittent reductionist approach to making regulatory decisions and generating data in the biomedical enterprise in general to a more holistic approach that incorporates data points from a variety of different intrinsic and extrinsic variables that influence the patient's experience and response to therapies. And to recognize that no single organization or entity is capable of producing all that data, all the data is required to have this holistic view. We should have access to a variety of different data sets to acquire data and analyze it in a decentralized fashion. And that's why blockchain has a lot of promise in terms of to that holistic edge of the patient's experience. So I'm the Director of Information Exchange and Data Transformation, which is developing a holistic approach, the FDA, primarily focusing on oncology, regulatory science, and this is an incubator where we, through public-private collaborations, will draw solutions in data science and agile health information technology development. So there are different components to what we do. One is, as many of you know, the FDA has a lot of trial data, actually over the years, as we've approved drugs and biologics and devices. We have accumulated a large volume of clinical trial data. So one thing that we started to do when we informed was to aggregate this data and to start looking across these data sets for meta-analyses and predictive analytics. And we've published a lot of this work in academic journals, and there are some analyses, exercises that are being used to inform internal decisions. And the other component of Inform is to really start to build organizational and technical capacity to start to leverage novel pipelines of data, including real-world data from electronic health records, but also sensors and IoT, also the multi-omic milieu that's very important in understanding the individual patient variability and the experience of the individual patient. So, and what we do is we call it algorithmic analytics, and that includes meta-analyses based on standard statistical methods, but also more advanced methods based on AI and machine learning. Our input is data, so we're very data hungry, and that's why we embarked on a blockchain effort. And the outputs are algorithms. Obviously, we publish, and some of the work we do inform guidance development. The outputs are algorithms that now we're calling drug development tools. And the concept of a drug development tool is very interesting, and it's really allowing us to go in very new and exciting areas. And this was actually enacted into law after the 21st Century Cures Act was signed back in November of 2016, where the Congress directed the FDA to design and develop drug development tools. And back in the old days, we used to call those call it biomarker. Where Congress realized that in today's data-driven world, biomarker just captures one physiological concept usually, and we need to go beyond that. So now a drug development tool in the 21st Century Cures Act is defined as a biomarker, a clinical outcome assessment, any other method, material measure that the Secretary determines a drug development and regulatory review for the purposes of the section this was mentioned in, which is to streamline drug development programs and organize clinical evidence generation. So algorithms are part of the definition of a drug development tools, and these can be AI algorithms, predict algorithms, and so forth. So we're building a toolbox, a drug development toolbox that, of course, includes biomarkers, something that the FDA has been very much involved with over the years, but also expanded that to include algorithms and predictive formulas that can be embedded into drug development programs in order to streamline and to find novel ways of understanding the patient's experience. So these are all data-hungry efforts, and we have been acquiring our data, as I mentioned earlier, through a variety of different means. programs over the years at the FDA, including the Sentinel program, started to query claim data. Currently through Informed, we have electronic health record data through just collaborations and public-private partners. And we're assessing the utility of using advanced analytics on these data sets. And we'll have a couple of biosensor projects, including a clinical trial that we actually are launching at the National Cancer Institute, the Intramural program, where we are utilizing sensors to understand the patient's experience as part of the clinical trial at the National Cancer Institute. So that data and the product in most of those cases are algorithms and drug development tools that we'd like to share with the community as a foundation that can be built upon to streamline clinical development program and help us better understand the patient's experience. So we embarked on a blockchain effort to really enable data liquidity, which should be not only to the benefit of the FDA, but all the stakeholders in the drug development community. So we're doing this in collaboration with Watson Health, and this has nothing to do with AI. As many of you may know, IM has been part of the Hyperledger Foundation, and that open source Hyperledger framework is what we're using, and we've built a prototype that we use to test transmission of data. We're hoping that as this experience fully develops, it can be a foundation for everyone else to learn from. And this is, I think, a collective learning experience for everyone. And the idea is really to enable an ecosystem, which one of the analysis we use is, when DARPA was working on Internet, it became the Intranet. So the efforts, our blockchain effort and similar efforts, we're hoping that they will all converge into a distributed system, a very decentralized distributed system that enable exchange of health data at scale. I think we've heard about the benefits of blockchain today, and there are a lot of provenance and privacy and security. There are three components that are very interesting to us when it comes to blockchain as a truly decentralized framework. There are a lot of different models, private blockchains and smart contracts, but to really enable a truly decentralized system, there are three components that are of special interest to us. One is that this a decentralized blockchain framework would be owner-mediated, meaning anyone who is the legal owner of that data can deposit the data into the framework, and more that has become a patient individual, and the individuals are gaining ownership of their data. But also be institutions and providers and networks that do have data that they want to contribute to a decentralized blockchain framework. And a truly decentralized framework is scalable, and it's also transparent. And these three components are of special interest to us in starting to move closer to the holistic edge of big data to really enable us to understand the individual, the patient's experience in a more comprehensive, complete fashion. Looking forward to participating in the discussion.
Thank you. We are beginning to queue up some questions, and please, the audience, please continue to add. And before we start that, John and Jose, do you have questions for each other that you'd like to ask? Okay.
Sorry. Oh, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, Sean, a very interesting presentation, and thank you very much for sharing. I just wonder, where do you see, if you had to kind of, if you were allowed to do an implementation, where do you see the low-hanging fruit? Where do you see the kind of point of entry to try it first?
That's a great one, and we've been thinking about appropriate use cases. I think there are a lot of different scenarios, and one would be to develop a mechanism for the FDA to receive genomic data, and specifically next-generation sequencing data. That's one of the use cases that we've been thinking about. Currently, there is no mechanism to do that. In some cases, if application does involve next-generation sequencing data, we ask for an extrapolation and a distillation of the data as transport file, or in a couple of cases, actually, they FedExed us hard drives. So I think that would be one of those low-hanging fruits, that would have value. In another use case, and that really truly requires a decentralized and horizontal framework that presents an active ecosystem of participants. And if those conditions are met, the individual patient-generated data would be of very keen interest, and these are data that are being created, wearables and sensors and mobile applications, such as are really under the control of the individual and the individual patient to have a way of having that data to understand the patient's experience, because after the drug or a biologic or a device approved, there's a post-market phase where we have to follow the performance of these drugs and how essentially patients and individuals are doing in terms of the focus at that stage is mostly on safety on drugs that have been approved and vetted by the FDA. So it's a cycle that is essentially never ending, and we have to as part of that post-marketing digital pharmacovigilance phase, it would be highly valuable to have access to patient-generated data.
So it's cool, really interesting things to me, Sean, that you said, and I've been kind of trying to wrap my arms around this. It sounds like you kind of identified one place where you don't have a mechanism, and I think for everybody on the phone that's thinking blockchain, if there's a spot where you don't have a clean mechanism for collecting data and there's not existing systems in place, you really have a green field. If you go into it not thinking about blockchain as the solution, but thinking about blockchain as the enabler of the solution, and remembering that creating that interface to kind of vacuum in the data from multiple parties, and then figuring out what you want to do with that data as a first step to test it is key. So I think the first example you gave a great example of that. On the second one, in the IoT space, I think there is a ton of potential there. And the question comes down to security, but I do think that there is a way to actually kind of mask the data and as transverses the chain itself, so you can still run analysis, but you can use masking technology to create some safety. And so, for those of you on the phone that are kind of thinking about these things, Sean, two awesome examples, and I'm excited just to hear you say that.
Debbie, I'm really curious about, actually to both of you, when you're about data, there is raw data that you're actually getting, but I got a sense from Sean's presentation that what is actually on the blockchain, is it shared analysis derived from that data and algorithms, or what is actually being, for both instances, what type of information is actually being put on the blockchain itself?
So just this is Jose. From my perspective, I want raw data, and I want to run microservices off of the raw data, and I may be pulling from different data sets, right? I may have patient data that I may be analyzing as it compares to clinical records and as it relates to doctors and their expertise. So I want raw data chain, and I want to use microservices to connect different data sets and do analysis. I mean, that's the way that I view it from the implementation that I did. From perspective, if there's already something that's kind of pre-analyzed and fact, then I will accept it and I will use it as such, as fact. But I want to create a mechanism to leverage microservices to drive learning across dynamic data sets. And when I mean dynamic, I mean that represent different activities, different people.
So I completely agree. I couldn't have said it better. We're looking at it in a similar way, and raw data is the ultimate goal. And I think there are a lot of things and novel opportunities for a variety of different microservices to extract maximal value from the raw data. So there would be an almost unlimited number of opportunities for innovation, leveraging the raw data that exists on blockchain. And I think that also speaks to the idea of really starting to look at health data, not an academic construct, which is what we've been doing for the most part, but as a utility, as a core utility for the common good, that essentially like electricity really flows to power ideas. And I think that's a different way of looking and thinking about health data. But I think in a lot of ways, we really want to make health data functional versus only academic. And that would be one way to liberate data and leverage opportunities that exist in connecting different sets and have a more holistic view on the ecosystem.
And I agree with you, Sean, and Debbie, I just want to take it a step further. If you think about you just being a consumer and going shopping, right now data is aggregated, and it says, Sean, we saw that you bought dog food. You may be interested in buying. People that bought dog food also bought this, right? So it's aggregated by an external entity that kind of pushes information to you. What we're talking about as it relates to health, or as it relates to consumer marketplace, is the disaggregation of data centered around the individual, so that the individual has the ability to query different data sets and learn more on the basis of information that they want shared with them. And that's a completely different model. It's user first, it's inner outward model. That's very empowering, and it decentralizes the activity, which has a ton of innovation, right?
So go ahead and look at it for some of the audience questions. We're going to paraphrase a. So I'm going to paraphrase to who's first. This is about your microservices bus, and they're wondering how does transactions on the blockchain trigger the running of an autonomous service, and curious whether this is open source and what type of blockchain did you use?
Yeah, so we used a private blockchain. We used Hyperledger Fabric. I am, when you think about the model that I described, I'm controlling the business rules. I know who the other entity is in my network, so it's very much akin to the way you'd manage your supply chain. You know who you're doing business with now, right? So I'm not using it on the basis of trust. The blockchain itself, I am using as a utility, to steal a word from Sean, I'm using it as a utility to ensure that I have the raw data, and I am building microservices off of the blockchains. So actually setting up smart contracts essentially, and if-then statements to drive certain actions to occur directly off the blockchain. I did not use, we had envisioned using autonomous systems in our implementation. We only automated machine learning and robotic processing automation. So we actually didn't proof the autonomous systems, other than the if-then statements actually trigger an interaction between multiple data and an analysis. But we're using like self-driving vehicles, or we weren't using like what you'd think of as an autonomous system. And we didn't get to that point yet because HHS, at HHS now, I left the place that we implemented this. So
I have a question for Sean, and he was, the question is, where can researchers find these algorithms that are in development?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question, and you know, this is we have published something we're doing, and these are meta-analyses, and obviously the reviewed vehicle is probably not the best mechanism to disseminate algorithms. So we're thinking about developing a drug development toolbox where these algorithms would be accessible to everyone. That's something that we're working on right now. And the idea is to really do foundational work that we can do given our vantage point. I think the FDA has a very unique vantage point since we're at the convergence point of a lot of data. And we are essentially leveraging, taking advantage of that vantage point to projects and initiatives, and in cases where the outcome is algorithm, we are right now at the stage of doing a mechanism to disseminate and make those algorithms available to everyone. But simply, you know, the step that we can do is to publish results of our analyses in peer-reviewed journals. However, we're actively looking at expanding on that, and we start to look at the algorithm as the actual product rather than just a publication, which it turns out is becoming harder and harder to communicate a lot of the findings in just a peer-reviewed journal. And the peer-reviewed journal in some cases would be essentially a user manual to the algorithm, how it was developed, and in cases that it was prospectively validated, what were the results.
Thank you, Sean Jose. These are really interesting presentations. This is Victoria. I just wanted to go back quickly. You had talked about putting raw data onto the blockchain. I'm sure you're very aware of everybody's privacy concerns about doing something like that. So even if you de-identify raw data, there can be ways of putting an identity to that. How do you deal with that issue? And particularly when thinking about possibly entire quantum computers even breaking decryption or bringing encryption.
Yeah, so I won't go out 10 years and solve the encryption problem. I'll look a little bit more in front of me. I'm not even going to tackle the 10 years. But what I say is, if you look at most major IT systems right now, right? If you look at architecture, what they look at, they tend to be a system in the middle, which is kind of system of truth. And it almost looks like a bicycle wheel, and a bit of smaller systems that go outwardly that access your system of truth in some form or fashion, whether it's an accounting system, whether it's a financial management system, that's a center, whether it's a health record system that's in the center. That's typically the structure of IT. So IT systems now. So if anything actually accessed in that centralized system, it can be corrupted and it can be changed, and privacy can go out the door. So with blockchain, what you have is you have the ability, and remember kind of what I said, you have the ability to take data onto Hyperledger, distributed amongst all of the nodes that are accessing it. You have the ability to create levels of control so that each individual node has its own view. As a government entity, I'm going to control the view that you have, right? So that each individual node has its own view. I'm not going to share Debbie's information with Zay. And then I can take any of the data I would consider that is considered private, and I can completely drop it off the chain and to a database that's actually off chain. So that I'm using, and I'm just putting a tag on Hyperledger that flags the fact on my blockchain layer that flags the fact that that data exists, but I'm actually housing it off chain with all of the security protocols that exist for a normal data set that you have. So it's actually actually increased privacy and increased security, because all of the nodes have to balance. So if there's any change, if there's anything that's moved, it's going to flag on every node, and essentially you can have it stop that activity from taking place. You can program that in as a microservice, right? That's your immutable record. And then you're dropping it off the chain with a marker that's on chain, so off of the blockchain with a marker that exists on the blockchain that actually references where it is, but ensured it's not actually directly on chain and accessible. So it actually adds an added layer of privacy, and that's my perspective on it.
Questions for Sean, and what's your view of FDA possibly receiving pseudonymized or anonymized aggregated real-world evidence data with agency value that? And then do you see informed expanding open FDA role in industry to help?
So for the first question, yeah, absolutely. And we've built electronic health record data, and we have several demonstration projects where we are looking at your data and clearly in the context of research, where there has been occasions where real-world data has been used to support approval decisions. We've crossed that threshold. I think one of the things that we're very interested in is to new opportunities for leveraging real-world data, not just the way that most of the efforts are designed current, which is retrospective examination of these data sets, but prospectively, meaning we currently have the technical capabilities to be able to track data from the point of routine care. Don't necessarily have to design a clinical trial, a traditional clinical trial, for every question that we want to answer. So multiple opportunities where we can, in fact, prospectively collect data from the point of routine care, and as we have smart IT solutions at the point of routine care. In those circumstances, we could, in fact, do randomization, extract data from electronic health records and sensors. And there are mathematical reasons why we're interested in that. If you, for example, look at oncology clinical trials, fortunately, only about 3 to 5% of adult oncology patients in the United States have the opportunity to participate in a clinical study. The male patients, for a variety of different reasons, are not eligible because of the strict eligibility criteria that we typically see in traditional clinical trials. Or there are other barriers. For example, distance and transportation has been a major barrier. And there's also another barrier that's called financial toxicity, that for a patient who may live 100 miles away from the closest clinical trial center, for a patient with advanced cancer, it's an opposition to leave their family and way to participate in a clinical trial even after they're eligible. So all of those factors have really led to a very low participation in traditional clinical trials in adult oncology and in other systems as well. So by building abilities to extract data from the point of care, real-world data, we can increase what we call the validity of clinical evidence, meaning our ability to individualize treatments out of care. Because if we're only capturing the experience of 3% of the population, 7%, extrapolating that to the other 97% may in some cases be problematic. And that's where leveraging sensor, real-world data, electronic health record data prospectively at the point of routine care would be very, very useful and helpful. And that is my So the long way of answering the first question, can you please remind me what the second question was?
Need to go back. It has opened the FDA.
Oh, yes. So, we are connect the dots with all existing efforts, including Open FDA, and I think in cases product of if it's an algorithm, for example, would be what Open FDA has pioneered. Our and drug development tools should be available broadly to as many as possible. So absolutely, that's something that we are about in connecting the dots internally.
A couple, I'd say some general concerns about the principle of medical data as a utility. But another question is, putting raw data on the blockchain, how do you handle the current scalability issues with block size and transaction speeds?
Yeah, so what we were able to do is have to separate out what a blockchain is and what a private blockchain is. When you think about scalability issues, if you just Google search blockchain and you read about the scalability issues, it's very much related to the public ledger. And what we actually used a private blockchain, and we only used Hyperledger for the automation and for the data that we wanted to run automation on. In fact, when automation for doing whatever analysis was complete, we dropped everything off of the shelf and put it in Mongo. So it became very scalable. We didn't run into any of the scalability issues that you'd normally flag with a public blockchain. So it really depends on where you're implementing it and use case is. Scalability issues are clear and present, and there are also security issues and major privacy issues. You use a public chain, but when you private chain, and if you architect it in the manner that I described, scalability is not so much an issue, and kind of the total transactions that occur. Issue that we foresaw. Now we hadn't implemented it across our entire network of 5,000 suppliers yet, but we actually foresee an issue in that space. And the biggest issue for us, just to being frank with everybody, was the change management issue. No longer need 90% of the existing IT support that facilitated my business process before. I think fundamentally the change that's going to drive through the entity or the organization that I'm working in. That was actually our biggest issue.
As I said, implementation is key, and there are a variety of different ways of implementing blockchain to facilitate exchange. And for example, one of the things we're doing to ensure privacy and protect the data, the raw data itself won't go on the chain. It's the permissions and the encryption, the keys that are required to unlock the data that is in the Hyperledger fabric on the chain, if you will. So a variety of different ways of implementing blockchain to increase security and to protect patient privacy.
So would it be that there is the potential to use blockchain like for services to process massive amount of raw data? And even though you're talking two different use cases, it's something similar that both of you have experienced.
Yeah. So, go ahead, John.
No, just definitely answer yes.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks. Okay.
Just to be clear, though, you're running microservices off-chain. And so we say blockchain-like microservices. Blockchain is facilitating a data layer that actually allows you to build microservices that are business activities, right? So you're taking kind of two technologies and you're leveraging the strengths of each of them to deliver an outcome. So I know that's a little bit nitpicky, but it's very important for an execution perspective.
It was brought up that quantum computing, for example, can be a threat to data security and encryption, but we can also look at it as an opportunity because there are a lot of privacy-preserving protocols that currently are running into computational challenges for implementation, homomorphic encryption and things of that nature, that with quantum computing and a better computational infrastructure can be applied. So I think as we have better means and their computational capabilities, we'll have better encryption and capabilities as well.
Yeah, he's 100% agree. And just, I didn't want to go there with with quantum computing, but quantum computing breaking encryption, it's one thing, but actually structuring the delivery of services in a manner where even if encryption is broken, that where nodes on the chain itself actually have to agree to any change or removal of data, sets a business rule that actually kind of slows down quantum computing's ability to actually access your data set. So they may have visibility into it, but there's no ability to export or change, right? And you couldn't do that with a singular database right now, but with distributed ledger, within a distributed ledger environment, you can actually build that safeguard in.
I guess one more comment or question. A major underlying blockchain, both of you have alluded to other services, standards, and protocols that will also are evolving or will be necessary for this environment. Do you have any thoughts of other emerging technologies, standard protocols that we should be keeping our eye on to support blockchain implementations going forward?
I'm interested in the four: automated machine learning, artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, blockchain architected and delivered in a manner, that drives an outcome. Obviously, quantum computing is something to pay attention to. I do believe that the creation of a 5G network and actually building a DLT within a 5G network with significant opportunities to redesign entire industries, leveraging that mobile network and leveraging the DLT as a basis to redesign business process. But, that's a great question. Don't know what to say.
So that was on a to-do list of mine, is to do like an infographic of all the different areas that may touch, because truly blockchain seems to be underlying technology that may support other things going to the future. Well, I thank you very much for joining and really making the top of the hour of this. We've been very grateful for you to join in your busy schedules, and thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. We have 200 and some participants still hanging on to the end. It's a great afternoon.
I want to remind everybody that today's webinar has been recorded, and the link to access the recording will be posted on the event webpage. An email will be sent to notify you when it's been posted. Echoing Debbie, thank you so much, Jose and Sean. Because the flu took out your two other panelists, you had to carry this on your own, and you did a fabulous job. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now,